Yeah, so welcome again to Body Wisdom for Transformation. And yeah, I just want to give you a heads up of what we're going to cover today, if that's okay. Well, we're going to jump into a practice right at the beginning after overview of the agenda. So this will be a centering practice. And then we're going to talk a bit about our definitions of certain things, and that'll be a little bit more conversational. Jess and I kind of back and forth. We'll also give a little bit of information about our background and what we're learning as co-explorers in embodiment. And we'll do a few more practices. Jess has a few ready to go, and a more in-depth discussion around the role of trust in this somatic journey in exploring body wisdom. So with that, I'll invite you to find yourself in a comfortable seated position with your spine relatively aligned. If you can, feel your feet planted on the ground. That would be great. If not, just really sense into your sit bones, supported by the surface that you're sitting on right now. I always like to imagine that, my feet are planted on the ground, and I imagine roots growing out from underneath them, really giving me the sense that I'm securely attached to the ground here. I'm held by this place. Tap into that feeling of really being held. With this foundation underneath you, with these roots, really feel the length of your body. So from the bottom of your feet all the way to the top of your head. Just sense into the expanse, the length of your body. If at any point sensation becomes too much, know that you're at choice of pulling back or going deeper into this experience. So as you feel the length of your body here in this space, just notice any sensation or movement that you're feeling in your body within your length. And imagine or sense the spine at the core of you holding you up. And just tap into your breath here and notice that when you inhale and exhale, that actually changes your length within space. So you might inhale and notice that your length kind of rises up, and you exhale and you kind of sink back down again. Just notice what happens with your breath in relationship to the length of your body. Just holding on to any information that you have in this dimension, in the length of your body. You can expand your attention or awareness to the width of your body. So kind of imagining from one side of one shoulder to the other side of the other shoulder, that width of your body, you're tapping into that. Bring your attention to any sensation that you might feel on your side body, on the side of your legs, the side of your feet, side of your torso, your arms, and maybe even the sides of your head. So, what can you sense, feel, or imagine about your ears from the width of one part of your head to the other part? As you become more aware of the width of your body, just tap into your breath here and notice as you inhale and exhale, that this changes the width of your body as well. Rib cage might be expanding. Just notice what happens to your breath in this dimension of width. And then now move your attention to the depth of your body. Now starting maybe from the front of your body, notice any sensation that you can feel. Movement, temperature, tightness, space. And then move your intention inwards. Sometimes it's difficult for us to sense our internal organs. And so feel free to either sense or imagine what's happening inside your body. Just pay attention to any sensation you can notice. If you're imagining, maybe imagining the beating of your heart, sensing and feeling the beat of your heart. If you're having difficulty locating something, whatever's coming up is totally okay. And continue to move your attention through to the back of your body. Sometimes it's difficult for us. It's difficult for me sometimes to sense the back of my body. So there might be a chair surface that helps you to sense the back of your body. But if not, you could always use your hand to just remind yourself of what it feels like. To tap into the sense of your back body. And just notice anything that you can feel here. From this space, I invite you to extend to your imagination. Imagine that there are some trusted friends, family, people that are behind you. These are people that really, care about you, you care about them, and they've got your back. Just imagine them kind of with you right now and behind you. You might even find yourself being aware of animals and non-human things that also have your back. The forest, the trees, plants, I don't know what it is, but just imagine that there are things behind you that are holding you and they've got you, are keeping you safe. You can come back to your breath and just notice again how your breath expands your depth. It changes the depth of your body. Always moving and shifting. And finally, bring your attention and awareness to the very center of yourself. And just bring to mind something that's really important to you. Maybe it's a value of yours, something you care deeply about. Maybe it's the purpose you see for yourself in the world or something you're deeply committed to. Just allow yourself to find something that really, really matters to you in this moment. And with that, I invite you to kind of gently bring yourself back to this space and time and come back to your screen. So this is a practice that's grounded in my own like somatic coaching journey. I got it from Strozzi Institute and their somatic coaching training organization. And essentially, helps us to come back into our body and feeling each of these dimensions. Can call it a centering practice because it can bring us to our center. And the important piece at the end, one of the important, I mean, it's all important, but one of the important pieces at the end is to really come to our sense of commitment, or, I mean, there's lots of ways we can call this, but our commitment, our value, some people say life purpose, whatever that is, to come back to that. And that can help reorient us in moving forward. So this is a tool that sometimes I use when I'm stressed, but it's also nice to just use as a regular practice. Yeah. Maybe we can tell you a bit about how we want to structure this chat.
Yeah, I think because we have an opportunity to have dialogue, and because we're talking about the body, and rarely is the body ever something that's linear, this is a pretty, it is a pretty organic process. We have an outline of what we want to do, but as things come up, we're just going to kind of flow with it. So if there are questions, or if there are observations and things that you want to talk about, that is always welcome. We are also, it was very generous of you, Heather, to consider us as experts, but we are also students. So this is a modality that we love to be in, and it's a lot of, there's a lot of exploration, and we are both teachers in our field, but we are teachers because we are students first. So the idea of exploring is actually what allows us then to share and to move through these different kind of somatic processes and in different ways. So we consider ourselves explorers, and that also just allows for us a sense of spaciousness. So if we came in with the idea that we had all the answers, then everything would probably feel a little more rigid, like we knew we have all of the right answers. But rarely with the body are things straightforward, and the body is constantly changing and always evolving. And so we want to approach our teaching the same way. So the spaciousness is a big part of this process for us too. One of the things that we hope that we can offer in this dialogue as well is that you can come away from this workshop with a sense of trust in yourself. So when we talk about body wisdom, and I'll probably say this, I'll repeat myself a bazillion times, but trust is such a huge part when we are really learning to listen. It's like the body has its own language, and it does, I think, move past our ability to verbalize or be able to use language to describe. When we're teaching each other and when we're working with each other, we need to be able to use language. But in the experience with ourselves, our body and our sensations in our body can move past language, and really being able to trust ourselves builds that relationship with our body, and builds into that sort of information system as we're cultivating a sense of openness and expansion in our sensory experiences. But we also recognize that, and Nick, I would love to hear more of what you have to say about this, the idea that this is a holistic process. So we are not just a body, even though we're talking about somatic and body work, we are not just a body, we are a whole system. And then as we get into definitions, that's part of one of my definitions, is that we are a process, we are a system, and we bring all of these different parts into this work. It's not, we very rarely silo parts of ourselves off. So Nick, do you have anything what do you think?
Yeah, and I suppose part of how we're structuring this is, we call it a workshop, but then it's like, I tentatively call things a workshop, because I think really, we're going to have a conversation and we're going to be co-explorers. So part of how we're structuring things is a little bit of back and forth conversation. So we don't know what's going to come up. That's part of the adventure of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, as we said before, we are using language to talk about something that doesn't often, in a way where our bodies might not be able to fully be expressed through language. We are still going to use language. And with that, we want to be really clear about some of the definitions that we're using. So the whole idea of top-down learning, where Nick, you're a pro at this, so I'm going to defer to you. We're really exploring sort of the converse of bottom-up learning. Nick, do you have a couple of thoughts about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is our dominant cultural, well, there's so many cultures, but certainly in Western thinking, and I think in most workplaces, for example, we're pretty focused on top-down thinking, like making sense of things in our brain as a way to move forward. I think one of my forays into, like, one of the first avenues into embodiment and somatics was Bessel van der Kolk and The Body Keeps the Score. I was really learning about this in the context of trauma. So what are ways that we can heal trauma that aren't just talk therapy? And you know, as time went on, there's lots of trauma in the world, not just in the sector I was working in nonprofit, and you know, there's lots of trauma beyond just what I was working with. But it also, I think that bottom-up, top-down approach applies to pretty much any new way forward of learning, new action. Yeah, so we have these very embedded neural pathways because this is the way we've done things for so long, and realizing that, oh, this is why, like, this is the origin story of why I'm doing this. Oh, okay, that makes so much sense. I mean, that moment can be really liberating and can be great, but it doesn't always change things. And it makes sense because these neural pathways are super developed, and making sustained change means practicing new patterns. And on an embodied level, that needs to happen, not just with our thoughts. So I don't know if I really responded to what you said about top up, bottom down, but that's what came up for me. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I think, when we're talking about somatic, there's a lot of, this is a word probably of the last 2 years that we've heard more and more of. But it's been around for a really, really long time. We've just used a little bit more, we've used it a little bit more fluently, I think. So a lot of this physical education stuff started kind of pre-World War II with calisthenics and understanding physical education as how to move the body efficiently, what the body does. Elsa Gindler, Moshe Feldenkrais, I've got all these names in the back of my head that just disappeared, but a lot of people that have been doing a lot of work for quite a long time, and it has evolved and changed. And what we know about somatic work is that it is not just the body that we're talking about, even though soma in Greek it actually means body. It is more of the whole living form. So with that, we involve the nervous system, we involve emotions, we involve all the different levels. But it's easy to get stuck in just analyzing it, as Nick said, top down. And so a lot of what we can't necessarily understand is some of the deeper stuff in the reptilian brain. And this goes into reflexes, which is in a lot of work that I do in HANA somatics. But when I'm talking about somatic, I'm thinking of the whole system as a process. So it is sort of outside of it, it moves through time, but it's not necessarily that stuck moment in time of one concrete idea. It is very fluid, and that makes it a little elusive. So when I instead am going to kind of refer to the nervous system as a really great way of understanding somatics, because our nervous system is not something that we're necessarily aware of all the time, but we can tap into different sensory experiences to really learn what's going on. It affects the body, it affects our thoughts, it affects our emotional body, all of these different levels. And so the nervous system, I think, is really key when we're actually, it's key in the definition of somatic. When we're talking about body wisdom, I think that's the ability to, and feel free, Nick, to jump in at any time. These are just my definitions. Body wisdom.
Before you do body
Yeah.
wisdom, can you say what henna somatics
Yeah,
is?
Hanna Somatics. So Thomas
Henna.
Hanna, yeah, Thomas Hanna, Hanna. He was a physicist and a philosopher who was working with Moshe Feldenkrais, who was a physicist, and this was in the 70s. Hanna started working throughout the 80s, and he believed basically that we can recover a lot of our ability to move our body. He was very concerned with movement. By paying attention to what's going on in the brain. So he worked with a couple of different reflexes. That's sort of what distinguishes Hanna Somatics from the Feldenkrais method. And somatics is really that we have control through our awareness to improve our state of being and the state of our body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel like the somatics definition. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing last night when when again I was coming to this question about what is somatics, and the nervous system. Just like, whew, this is so important to consider the nervous system in as a key part of the definition of somatics. And I suppose the piece about whole systems comes up for me as well. Like the whole human system is somatics. Like, and I almost there's this word integration, which I know we're going to define, but
go for it.
There's this idea about integrating the whole human system with attention to the nervous system. That feels like that's really important in the definition of somatic, for me at least.
Yeah.
And then that brings me back to the top-down thing again, because okay, one of the cool things that I learned this year was about the gut nervous system, the gut portion of our nervous system. What is it? Enteric nervous system, that can actually ignore signals from our brain. And again, this was like this shatters the hierarchy of the body mentality that the brain's in charge and the rest of the body just listens to its commands. It's like, oh, there's parts of our bodies that can actually be like, no brain, you don't know what's best right now. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and I think adding to that idea of integration, it is on our list. Bringing all of the different pieces together, it can be a process. It's not always linear. I think it is a way of of allowing information to be digested and fully grasped by the body, by the nervous system. So when I use the word integration, I mean, I use it in a lot of different contexts, but the most often way I use it is actually in class when I'm teaching movement. Towards the end of class, there's always a moment of integration, which is just stillness. It would maybe be similar to Shavasana, except that you're not, I tend to fall asleep in Shavasana, but it's less falling asleep and more just an opportunity for the body to digest and bring everything together the same way you would with food. So bringing in nutrients, bringing in information, allowing the brain to sort of process and adapt, I guess, to what it's learned, so that you come away kind of hanging on, bringing with you more of what maybe your brain has been able to process, more of what you've learned. This is specifically with movement, but I think it can be sort of applied more meta as well.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose in coaching, which we should define coaching too, right? We will. In my practice with coaching, I think it's a key part of somatics is integrating all these parts of ourselves. Sometimes the part that is this habit or behavior that we keep on repeating that we don't like, integrating that and not pushing that to the corner of ourselves or trying to get rid of it or overcome that, but actually just integrating that part of ourselves and all of the other parts of ourselves. So I think it also applies to coaching. What were you going to say about body wisdom? Sorry, I jumped in.
Yeah, no, that was great. Love it. Organic, fluid. I think body wisdom is really interesting because as the trust with ourselves grows, and as our ability to sense maybe what's going on in some of the deeper levels, with this movement, with Hanna Somatics, there's a lot of things we call there's parts of the body that tend to hold what we call sensory motor amnesia, which is the brain's inability to have full control over a very specific muscle group, muscle pattern. And body wisdom, I think, as we grow our ability to trust ourselves and sense ourselves, the wisdom of the body becomes a little bit louder. We allow more space to be able to really hear what our body is saying. So when I'm feeling off center, let's say, or if I feel like I'm a little too anxious, I can tell, I've learned to be able to pay attention to the fact that my body is either wanting me to stop, it's wanting to hold me still. There's a little bit more tension, or maybe I'm sort of bracing for something, like I can actually feel the sensation that I'm trying to like hold on to something and find stability. And that gives me a more of a clue of what's going on, because my thoughts can trick myself. I can choose, with this top-down learning style that we've all learned, to listen to my thoughts rather than listen to my body. I can use my brain and my thoughts to say, well, but I'm really okay, or I have no reason, but that doesn't take away any of the physiological sensations that I'm experiencing. So really being able to listen to the body, believe that it is giving you great information, and learn how to communicate and almost, I would say, maybe give it what it needs, but just have the conversation with it. I think learning the language of the body, I think, is a lot like body wisdom. And then there's the choice to engage with it, however that looks. Nick, do you have anything you want to add?
The piece about developing the wisdom stood out to me. And just thinking about the time, probably like one of my first yoga classes where the instructor said something about like how, like, move this hip. And I'm just like, what are you even talking about? I don't even know how to move this part of my body. So that when you made that comment about developing more attunement to parts of ourselves, it just reminded me of how much of a process that can be, in terms of accessing more and more and deeper awareness of each part of ourselves and each part of our body, and the role of integration in that, even like the role of pausing and saying, oh, okay, that's how this part of my body moves. Sometimes sense making out of that too, like, I'm feeling this is unlocking some emotion. I wonder what's happening there. I think there can be a role for sense making, but sometimes that's not as important as just experiencing it. So that was coming up, and the other piece that comes up too is just like what role this plays in our culture or workplaces, how we organize as human systems. If we're completely ignoring this part of ourselves, the wisdom of the body. And I suppose that brings us to like the embodiment versus disembodiment piece. Like if we're walking around as humans who are disembodied, are mostly focused on our thinking body, like the thinking part of our body, then we're missing out on just like so much information, and so much of life. Like aliveness we're cut off from parts of our own aliveness. So I don't know what would you expand on in terms of embodiment and disembodiment?
I was trying to see if I could add a little, like, that 100 emoji. I just wanted to put that right. I was like, yes. I would.
There's a thumbs up.
Oh, okay. I need to find that one.
Under reactions. Yeah.
Okay. I think the idea of embodiment, and the last definition we have on here is the idea of transformation too. And I think these two, this is where a lot of things come hand in hand, because embodiment to me is the ability to have all of you, or most of you, or as much of you as possible present. And we don't know what we don't know. That's what is really fascinating about the body, is that because we've prioritized listening to our brains rather than listening to our bodies, we don't know the information that we don't have. So a really intentional practice, I personally think, around movement allows us to expand that. So embodied, I would say, is having more of you available. And that means that you are more resilient. That means that you have more capacity. And we're not talking about in terms of achievement. We're talking about in terms of experiencing life. Everyone, I think, deserves the most out of life and the most experience. And for that to happen, I think we need to have most of us present, or at least within our access point. And that's where I think the transformative aspect, body wisdom for transformation, comes into play, because transformation to me is the change. It is more of you. It is an expanded sense of awareness, expanded sense of self that you then get to carry and embody and bring with you into everything you do, whether it's washing the dishes, going to work, having a nap, doesn't matter. It's more of you present in the world. And how could that not be, I mean, I'm getting a little esoteric, but how could that not be a gift to everyone, including yourself?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of, well, there might be more than these access points, but when I think about thought, like thinking through things and making sense of things on an intellectual level, that can be helpful. So, I mean, I don't think there's any point in putting that aside or making that wrong, but it's just like we have perfect thumbs up. We have focused a lot on that aspect of ourselves and our humanity. I mean, I think even emotion too has been like, let's not keep that in the workplace. Let's keep that out of certain things. It's unprofessional to have certain emotions, or to explore emotions. So I think we've diminished that as an avenue for change and transformation, especially in organizations. And then the body, I mean, that body and sensation, it's like this has no place in the office. I think there's this growing more and more because there's mindfulness. There's a lot of attention to mindfulness, even in tons of sectors. But at times I've noticed, as we've done things, Jess, as you and I have done things at different organizations, you still notice there's a lot of awkwardness around exploring that. And I think there's probably a spiritual aspect too, like a spiritual avenue, that these are different avenues for change and transformation within ourselves and within society. And it's like we've been really only using one channel for so long.
That's a great description, using one channel. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, obviously we both feel like there's a lot of conversation to have, but maybe before we go, just wondering if anyone has any thoughts or questions, if you want to ask. So we're going to just play with a very simple kind of movement. It's a shoulder shrug, and it's based on this idea of this concept of something called pendiculation. Pendiculation is sort of a term that has been actually adopted from veterinary medicine of what cats and dogs do when they get up to move, where you see them stretch, but it's a kind of a contraction and then a really slow release. And it's similar to what we do when we yawn in the morning. When we think of stretching, we think of, something that we're doing actively, where we're pulling into certain areas of our body, and it can be relatively unpleasant. Pendiculation is actually meant to be very subtle in sensation. And relatively enjoyable. It's quite soft. So we're going to focus mostly, because we're seated and we're not going to put you on the floor, a pendiculation of the upper trap muscles. So these muscles that run up kind of by the neck and then down to the outside of the shoulders and a little bit down the back. What tends to happen is these muscles often get very tight. When our body is not too sure of its systems of movement, we can overcompensate with our upper trap muscles. They're sort of our emergency muscles. If we're having a hard time breathing and our diaphragm isn't moving, we'll often emergency breathe up into the upper parts of our chest. And because we're often, especially during a pandemic, we're seated a lot of the time at our computer, we can become quite hunched over and we can carry a lot of tension up here. So this is a really soft way of releasing some of the tension. But through this, we're going to kind of explore some of building our capacity to sense and why somatic work can be quite subtle, but also very transformative and profound. So take a moment just to find a place where you're comfortable sitting on your chair. So if this is, if you feel like you need to kind of like be resting with your back on the chair a little bit, if you feel like you have a good sense of your spine and you're not going to be holding too much tension in your lower back or hunched too far forward in your chest, you can sit away from the back of your chair, wherever is comfortable. And I'd invite you, if you have the capacity, to just let your arms hang by your side so your fingertips are actually sort of weighted towards the floor. And then if it feels good, you can close your eyes. If you would rather keep your eyes open, that's just fine too. I find for myself, it's easier for me to tap in and sense things when I take away one of my external senses. So you're going to see me close my eyes. And then just take a moment, to be curious about your shoulders. Now, what comes to mind? What do you think of when I say the word shoulders? Where does your shoulder begin and where does it end? Do you have a sense that maybe your shoulders are long, that they are away from the center of your body or pulled into the center of your body? Do you have the sense that there is the front of your shoulders, maybe around your collarbones, your upper chest? Do you have a sense of the back of your shoulders, around your shoulder blades? And for the sake of this practice, we're going to think of anything that is connected in and around the rib cage. That is the top of your shoulders from the outside of your neck down to the place where your arm begins. So not anything that's connected to your arm bones, but actually inside towards the center of the body, more in your torso. That's what we're going to think about when we're playing with the concept of shoulders. So just be curious in your awareness that we just explored. Do you have a good idea of what your shoulders are doing, of where they are? Are you more drawn to one side? That is, are you more aware of the left side or the right side? Do your shoulders have a different shape from one another? And can you tell that just by paying attention, your awareness may have grown just a little bit? Now choose a shoulder that feels like it is closest to your ear. So whatever shoulder feels like it's drawn up towards the ceiling, it doesn't matter if you're right, whatever it feels like from the inside out. And if you're not sure, just take a guess. You don't have to be right. There is no right here. Begin to draw that shoulder up towards your ear. So it's like you're shrugging one shoulder up towards your ear. And notice if your arm wants to get involved. That is your arm moving away from the side of your body? That tends to be your delts actually being used. And we're just thinking about the muscle, your upper trap, right at the top of your shoulder. Take your opposite hand and poke that muscle. Make it clear to your brain what muscle is actually working. Hold that shrug, not so much that it's causing too much work. And then take your time. Like really take your time to see how slow and how smoothly you can allow that shoulder to relax. So your arm comes all the way down to where it started, maybe even a little farther. And notice if there's any other parts of your body, something in your jaw, in your neck, in your belly, maybe even in your legs that's trying to help out. Anything that's activating that you actually do not need. Find that moment where you've completely let go of that muscle. Is your arm in a different place than when you started? Maybe it feels the same, maybe it feels different. And play with that same movement again. Shrug your shoulder up towards your ear. You don't have to shrug it all the way. You could just do what's comfortable. Can you feel the muscle that is working? And if it is not clear to your brain what muscle is working, use your opposite hand to poke it. We're putting your brain into that muscle. Make it clear to your brain what's working. Let go of anything else in your back, in your arm, in your chest, in your neck, anything you don't need. And see how slowly you can go in this release. Do you notice any jumps, any jerks, any kind of instability along the way? And if you feel that, just pause for a moment, shrug your shoulder just to before that happened, and see if you could go even slower to smooth it out. Notice if your body wants to add work as you are letting go of this muscle, or could you allow everything in your body to remain soft? Can you find a place where it feels like your shoulder has arrived, where your arm is resting heavy on your rib cage, or is it a little farther than you thought? Once your shoulder is completely relaxed and you've totally let go, pause here and just notice. Is this shoulder in a different place than when you started? We've only done this movement twice, but do you have a bigger sense of this shoulder? Do you have more awareness? Are there things that you're able to pay attention to that maybe weren't as clear before? And if you compare it to your second shoulder, do you have a sense that there's a little more awareness on one side compared to the other, like things are a little bit clearer? Just notice what you feel, notice what you sense. Notice if the picture in your mind has changed between these two shoulders. And then when you're ready, let's do the same thing on the second side. So your second shoulder, draw that shoulder up towards your ear. We're working your upper trap. So use your upper hand or your opposite hand, poke the muscle that's working, make it clear to your brain the muscle that is active, let go of everything else. Let your arm rest heavy by your side. Notice if your arm is forward or back. You don't need to correct. Just notice the way that your brain chooses to shrug this shoulder. And then take your time to let it go. The slower you go, the more your brain can learn. You have the sense that as your shoulder comes down, it also widens. That is, it broadens across your chest. It lengthens away from your body. So not only does your shoulder move down, but it moves away. Is there anything else that's jumping in to try and control the release of this movement? Anything in your back or your arm? Anything in your belly, maybe even in your waist? Find the place where your arm has completely let go, so it's resting heavy on your rib cage. Notice how it feels. Do that one more time. Shrug that second shoulder up towards your ear. Make it clear to your brain the muscle that is working. If you need to use your opposite hand to poke it because it's difficult to feel from the inside out, do that. Use your hands as a great tool to be able to sense a little bit more. And then take your time, really take your time. We don't need to rush this, but notice if that's in your inclination to see how fast you can get to the end. And instead, could you see how much information there is? How much do you notice about how your shoulder chooses to let go? Do you have a sense of a shape change in your rib cage? Can you feel all the clunks along the way? If it feels like you want to explore that a little bit more, you can pause and shrug just to before you felt that contract, to before you felt that little jump. See if you can actually go a little slower, softer to smooth it out. Notice if you can arrive all the way at the end without pulling down, without adding more work in any other parts of your body. Find the place where your arm is completely let go. And then just pause and notice your two shoulders. Do you have more awareness of your shoulders than you did before? We've done two movements on either side, but just notice what is different. It doesn't have to be a big difference either. It could be something quite small, quite subtle. In fact, if you're able to notice the subtleties, that shows your brain's observational and somatic intelligence. So notice the small changes. Take a soft inhale, relax. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back into this space. Nice job, everybody. So this is a really just a basic kind of exercise that we sometimes do in class. But I'm curious, what did you notice about just that little exercise? We're going to do a little chat here, and then we'll come back and share a little bit more. But you can. So this ability for us to be able to play with our sensations and play with our experience of how muscles move and how our bodies move and how our brain has organized itself in making movement, I think is really, it's a great way to explore some of these somatic principles. And this is just one avenue when we're talking about somatics and we're talking about body wisdom. But could you feel that from the beginning, when you were initially paying attention to your shoulders to the end, that was a very short amount of time. We did two shrugs on either side, but the intelligence and our ability to sense grows. Like, oh, it doesn't take a whole lot. And what we did was gave our brain an opportunity to be safe, to be mindful, and to be curious. And with that, everything sort of started to evolve and change. So the idea then of being able to sense, to trust ourselves starts to grow, because you notice the differences. You notice when things have changed. And that adds to our ability to trust that, oh, this is a difference. This makes that I feel something different. And I can value that and I can validate that within myself. That's, I think, a start of a beautiful friendship, as it has been said. So how about you, Nick?
Thanks, Jess.
Sure.
What came up for me, I was curious of, if you want to explain your role a little bit more, or like how you describe the work that you do. So I just realized we kind of skimmed over the work we do.
I thought we could take it on to the end too. So I'm a somatic movement educator. I teach somatic movement. That is, I teach it's a series of different movements that are all connected to walking, to reaching, to very basic fundamental movements like rolling over, developed by Moshe Feldenkrais and Thomas Hanna. And I do it in classes. I also do it one-on-one. But it's working together. So as we said before, we use a lot of language, and a lot of what I'm describing might not be the same for everybody, but we go through different movements, we cue different things and move from one place at the beginning of class or the beginning of our session to a different place towards the end. So we are moving, it's just quite subtle, and we do that together. I came to the work because I actually had been I didn't realize, but I had some undealt with trauma and had been struggling for a few years with some health issues and some joint issues. And then I got quite sick with a virus and ended up actually losing my ability to walk efficiently. So I could still walk, but not very well. Sometimes I had to crawl or I had to use a cane, and very rarely was I able to walk without somebody else's assistance or a device. And it happened very fast. It was just a short amount of time. And I also was experiencing quite a bit of pain. My brain wasn't able to fire as well. And then I couldn't process some of my sensory experiences, lighting, sound, all of the balance sort of started to dysregulate. And I was stuck in bed for about 2.5 years, and then came to this work just by happenstance. I had a cousin that was dealing with something and was visiting a practitioner, and he suggested it to me. I went, didn't understand at all what was going on for 2 or 3 months, just sort of followed along, and then realized 3 months after that point, so about 3 to 6 months in, that my pain had gone down by about 90%, 80-90%. I was able to walk. I had a dog at that time. I hadn't been able to walk the dog. Was able to walk on my own. About 3 to 6 months after that, I started feeling really, really good and started coming back to some martial arts practice. And about 6 months after that, I was able to do CrossFit. So within 1.5 years, my life was completely different. I went from planning, we were saving to put a wheelchair ramp in the house because that's where we thought I was going, and ended up being in a completely different place. So with that experience, I decided there is something here. I didn't fully understand it. So I started to study it and did the teacher training. And here I am with this, just a real passion for some of this work because of the transformation I've seen in my life, but also in some clients and students that I've been really fortunate to work with. So that's how I came to this work. I also got to work with Nick. We sort of had a conversation once about somatics and realized that we were doing something really interesting. It was different, almost like different areas, but with a very similar overlap. So I started to also work with Nick doing some somatic coaching, and he comes to some of my classes. And so Nick, why don't you explain a little bit about what you do with your somatic coaching and how you came to that?
Yeah, thanks so much for telling that story again. It's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I kind of gave a background about how I came to understanding more bottom-up learning and returning to that. And it wasn't until a few years later, after I had already done my coach training, that I discovered somatic coaching specifically, and some of the neuroscience practices that line up really closely with this somatic coaching approach, which is from Strozzi Institute, and of course there are many others that are doing somatic coaching. That's just the the place that I go to the most. And yeah, for me, I found, because I've been a participant in Jess's practice and Jess's classes, you know, I've found that the process of doing the very thing we just did, like the shoulder pendiculation, you know, has helped me on a physical level, but there's something about this shoulder that is tied to emotion, some emotion. It's been unlocked a few times, especially when we could be in person, like pre-COVID, and Jess was like rotating the shoulder for me, and then I was just like sobbing. It was great. So I knew that there was something special there, and like same thing. I still feel like I'm such an explorer in this area, but I know that when I'm in a coaching session, when I'm working one-on-one with people, mainly I work with folks in nonprofit or in social change in some way. I know that we have to bring more awareness to what's happening in the body if there's any hope for sustained change. And it depends on who you are. Like for some people, that means just saying, are you noticing anything? And just and maybe the answer is no, and just getting them closer and closer to noticing what's happening in the body when they're talking about this issue, like a conflict with a staff or, you know, whatever the issue is they're talking about, noticing connections to the body. It could be really gradual like that, or it could be like when I get to work with Jess, because you know, she's so in tune with her own body. We can go, like, it's really fun. We can explore some really interesting places of what's happening and how it's connected to whatever topic we're talking about in coaching. Mm-hmm. So, and if you're not aware, like coaching, the profession of coaching, I mean, it sounds like often people think it's, you know, basically like telling people what they should do with their life. But really, the core of a coaching approach is eliciting wisdom from others. And so we can do that on an intellectual level, but I also like to tap into emotions and body. How, like, what wisdom can we elicit from all of these parts of ourselves? So yeah, just so you know what it is we do. Like
and getting to do some coaching, because I when I had only really done somatic movement in these classes and my own training, but when I got to do some of the somatic stuff with Nick, it would be really interesting to feel a lot of the movement stuff we do has structure to it. We do left brain, right brain stuff, but a lot of what it was sort of this, how does something like this image make me feel? What does my body want to do? How do I want to express that? And it was a very different experience than what I had initially been working on through with. And so getting to kind of feel this, like my body really wants to do this right now, was a really cool, completely different approach that has actually helped my practice to really pay attention to times where I feel like maybe I'm coming in with an agenda rather than an openness to an experience. So it's mutual. We have this great little collaboration, I think.
Yeah, because it's like there is something critical in both of our work about the body, somatics, body wisdom, like all of the things that we've talked about, but it's like we're coming at it from a little bit of a different angle, or
totally.
Yeah, so that is lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I thought that might be helpful to just share.
It's a great call. Yeah, so one of the things, this idea of just I'm just thinking about how subjective these experiences are. And so what everyone experiences, whether it's with movement or, I mean, coaching or martial arts or sport or walking or whatever, your experience is your experience. And we have a tendency to devalue the subjective experience. But first person, in my work, we call it first person somatic experience. It is incredibly valuable because nobody else can experience that for you. It is entirely yours. And I think it's a little piece that's actually missing from a larger conversation. I do fully believe in the medical system, but I think that's a third party perspective of what can be happening. And so having more of an awareness in our first person perspective, I think can add, and there's even more of a collaboration that's possible with some of these outside views, bringing our inside view into that. Do you have anything?
I mean, this is not what we plan to talk about, but for me, I'm like, because I'm a part of my work is like in regenerative leadership and even like non-hierarchy or attention to power dynamics. And so I immediately think of just like how ingrained that is to trust the expert or the other person about what's going on for us.
Yeah.
And it's just all tied up in this like hierarchy and power dynamics. And oh, don't get me started. But anyway, that's where I went.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, it is. And with that, I think with the fact that no one else can have our experience for us and that it is truly ours and it has value, there is a certain amount of self-responsibility, I think, in choosing to do some embodiment kind of work. I think we can choose to be disconnected from ourselves as well, because it makes things a little more bearable. If things can feel, we tend to numb out a lot instead of sinking in. And that's also, yeah, a great observation in the chat. Being heard is really hard, especially when you know something deep, when you know something is true for you, and feeling like it's not met, received, validated from somebody outside your first person experience. I think that's a very astute observation and painful one. Yeah, I just want to recognize that.
Tied up in power as well. This,
Mm.
I don't know, I think this other as expert and needing to have the answers as let's say it's a doctor, not to pick on doctors. But.
Yeah. Yes, exactly true. I think I'm going to carry on, Nick, if you feel like you have anything you want to add.
Please.
Yeah, this idea that sometimes I think we come into an experience or a sensation with judgment, that one way is a good way of feeling and one way is a bad way of feeling. And I think obviously pain is information and it doesn't feel good. But when we're doing movement or when we're doing somatic work, we can easily come in and say there's a right way to do this. And that is not based on the individual's experience. And so taking an opportunity when we are choosing to do this work to really be conscious of when judgment creeps up in making a movement, in trying to get it right, in trying too hard, all of that can show up. And I think being really neutral and in our observation is key to being able to let some of those subtler sensations come to the surface. Any thoughts, Nick?
Yeah, that's on learning a lot.
Yeah.
Because it's like I totally want to ask if I'm doing this right. And I'm embarrassed if I'm doing it wrong. That's obviously ongoing work that I need to do. But it totally ties into this trusting yourself and the other as expert.
Yeah.
Just for me personally, I mean, I'm always like, am I doing it right? Yeah.
I teach movement, and in my own practice, I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Like there's a larger narrative that comes into how we move and how we experience ourselves. I think that's very, very common.
But so what's coming up for me is a question, and maybe there isn't an answer, but what helps us to develop trust then in our experience in our own bodies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it does change for everybody. I think there are times where people's experience of their bodies has been affirmed throughout their whole life. And I think for a lot of us, I think of sick days, actually, when people feel guilty taking a sick day, when they know that they could take a sick day and they need to, and maybe they don't feel like it's worth, like I've just got a runny nose, but somewhere in my mind, I need a sick day, or I don't feel sick, but I really shouldn't be going to work today. I know that. I think sometimes there's a lot of this trying things on and believing ourselves with a sense of humility, and that we still don't know what we don't know, and our ability to be honest that there are pieces of us that maybe we cannot feel, that we cannot sense, that we can't tap into, that could be running a larger portion of our lives is not a bad thing. I think that's a great invitation to explore. Movement was what helped me. I think it's different for everyone, but movement gave me, I had reoccurring nightmares for most of my adult life. And I knew within about a year of practicing, my nightmares changed. And then 2 years after practicing, I didn't have them anymore. And that was something I kind of tapped into early on. I was like, this is doing something and I don't fully get it. But later on throughout my experience, it started to make more sense. And so maybe it's time can allow us to really experience that. But I'm wondering if there are
time and practice is what I'm hearing. Practice. Yeah.
That's just for me. That's just the world that I inhabit. But I've seen it work for colleagues and students as well. So it's a great question. I think we need to be asking that question a lot. Yeah.
I totally lost track of time. So
Me too.
Yeah. Are there things you want to get through?
No, I think maybe just having a nice recap and then having some time for some dialogue and some questions, if that sounds good to everyone else. That'd be nice.
Yeah. So maybe I can ask you then, like, what is probably going to be different today than it was the last time we had this type of conversation, but what is kind of the summary of what you're walking away with, or what's most important about this conversation?
Are you asking me specifically?
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure. I think there's more and more conversation happening around the body, and that we have treated the body, I think, through different kind of social evaluations as something that is less important, except when we need to prove something, when we need it to help us work really hard, when we need it to keep ourselves awake at night for our children, for climbing this mountain, for, we really, I think, see the body as a tool rather than as a process, as information and as wisdom. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having to work hard at times. I think we are really lucky when we, get to be there for somebody, when we get to hike up to a mountain. But I think the capacity for what we know about the body and what we know about ourselves can really be explored. I think neuroscience is starting to change. I think a lot of the things that we have already known about human beings are just we're seeing more and more proof of it. But I think at the end of the day, for me, it really comes down to this sense that we don't know what we don't know. That's not threatening. That's actually that's something to explore. That's something that we get to be curious about. And if we can be gentle with ourselves in that exploration process, I think there's all kinds of things that we get to unravel, and they become ours. They become part of our story. I could talk about this kind of stuff for forever, but my insides always want to see more people be more themselves, to have more of themselves available, and to be able to walk through the world with more confidence, with a sense of knowing what they need to do for themselves, knowing how resilient they can be, that there is untapped resources and beauty and information. But I often think about what the world would look like if we were more of us, if there was more of us available to ourselves. So how about you, Nick? Same question.
Lovely.
Back to you.
Yeah, that's lovely. I mean, a lot of that stood out. The shift from looking at our body as a tool. Yeah, that stood out. And again, what came up for me is this power dynamic, the command and control. So our brains will command and control our body to do what we want it to do. So more of that top-down paradigm that we have across, so many of our cultures and societies. So that comes up, and the relationship between that paradigm and not trusting the I don't want to say users experience. I don't
Oh,
know,
that's
we're
a good.
users of our body, but anyway, I can't think of a better word. The not trusting of the user experience.
Mm.
I see that as connected to this top-down paradigm. So shifting our consciousness to more of a realization that we are our own explorer experts, and that we can co-create and partner with other explorer experts. Even the people that we perceive as the most expert in any field are also learning, like they can't know everything about the whole system.
Yeah.
And I suppose that leads me into the other piece about this. We must shift to whole systems thinking, from our own internal body of, self as so much, like multiple parts.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I think one of those is the thinking brain, our physical bodies, our emotions, spirituality, and probably more that I've not named. Like there's so many aspects of our whole selves. And I think it's only through doing that work internally that we get to mirror that work in the world of integrating, within wider culture and society. So it feels like this is a great leverage point, embodiment, for wider social change.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we are our best teacher, our best student, and our best subject. And getting to work with all three in different ways is a really integrated experience. It's a holistic experience. It's a very expansive one as well. We get to see things from a bunch of different angles within ourselves, from ourselves. So
yeah.
Nice.
Okay, so these are just some resources. Maybe there's so much more. There's us, like we're happy to keep in touch. please stay in touch. And we will share this recording with you as well if you want to go back to anything. Here are some books that have been helpful or meaningful for us. So The Body Keeps the Score mentioned. Your Body is Your Brain is more of a coaching, embodiment coaching approach. Ginny Whitelaw is also someone I've been reading lots of her stuff around embodiment. And then Gabor Mate, I think it's When the Body Says No. I changed that title, Jess.
Yep.
Unless there's another book that you had in mind.
All of them, all of Mate's stuff.
All of Gabor Mate,
yeah.
Canadian doctor. And Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. So a lot of these do talk specifically about trauma and the body. But yeah, and these are just some resources. And the Embodiment Conference used to be up here, but I'm not sure how often it's going to take place or going to happen. But that's maybe something to be attuned to. I think they're now called Embodiment Unlimited. So they're another good resource.
And Nick does coaching, and his company is called Invoke. I do somatic movement in classes, and my company is called Flourish Somatics. We should have mentioned that. But those
we
those
never
two
did
things.
it.
No. But you can always send
That's
us
us.
an email. You can find us online, and just to talk, right? Like it doesn't. Sometimes, again, like the conversation we just had, it's really just helpful to be able to hear. We're also all on social media and Instagram too. So if you feel free to drop a line or have those interactions at any point. It's not top down, right? Like this is wide. It's rhizomatic. It's about group learning. So what somebody else experiences somewhere else can influence how my experience and my practice goes. And that's a gift, right? It's never a tax. It's always a way of collaborating and working together. So
agreed. Thanks so much for being here. And this has been a lovely conversation. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing as well, and being willing to be honest and transparent and vulnerable. It is just been very beautiful to be a part of. So thanks, everybody. We may do this at some point again. We'll see. We just go with the flow. So that's all I've got. Nick,
Awesome.
anything from you?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.